The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest and makes you notice every creak of the floorboards. Ethan sat on the worn leather couch in their Austin living room, a half-empty coffee mug balanced on his knee. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the wooden beams overhead and the lingering trace of Megan's perfume, something floral she'd started wearing a few months ago. He couldn't remember when she'd stopped wearing the old one, the one that used to remind him of summer mornings. The realization stung, a small cut among many he hadn't noticed until they started to bleed. Their home, a modest craftsman with wide windows and a porch that caught the Texas sunset, used to feel like a sanctuary. 9 years ago, when they'd moved in, Megan had danced barefoot across the hardwood, laughing as she dragged him into an impromptu waltz to no music at all. They'd been married a year then, still dizzy from the newness of it, still believing love was a structure that could hold forever if you built it right. Ethan, the mechanical engineer, had always been good at building things, systems, machines, plans. Megan, the architect, brought the color, the curves, the beauty that made his straight lines feel alive. "We're a perfect blueprint," she'd said once, her head on his chest as they lay in bed, watching the ceiling fan spin lazy circles. He believed her. Now, the blueprint was fraying. The living room, with its mismatched pillows and framed photos, felt like a museum of a life that no longer existed. On the mantel, a picture from their Colorado trip stared back at him. Megan, bundled in a scarf, her cheeks pink from the cold, laughing as she tossed a snowball. Ethan stood beside her, his arm around her waist, grinning like a man who'd won the world. He couldn't remember the last time she'd looked at him like that, with that unguarded joy. These days, her smiles were polite, practiced, the kind you give a coworker or a stranger at the grocery store. He sipped the coffee, cold now, and let his eyes drift to the empty spot on the couch where Megan used to curl up with her sketch pad. She hadn't drawn in months, not since she started staying late at the firm. Deadlines, she'd say, tossing her bag over her shoulder as she headed out the door. "This project's killing me." But her voice carried a lightness that didn't match the words, and her phone, always in her hand, always face down, lit up with notifications she dismissed too quickly. Ethan had never been the type to snoop. He trusted her. Always had. Maybe that was the problem. Am I imagining this? The question clawed at him, a whisper he couldn't silence. The signs were there, piling up like leaves in a neglected yard. The late nights, the new perfume, the gym membership she'd suddenly taken up after years of saying she hated exercise. "I'm doing it for me," she'd told him, her eyes bright with something he couldn't name. He'd nodded, supportive because that's what husbands do. But deep down, it didn't feel like it was for her. It felt like she was preparing for someone else. And then there was Josh. His name had become a fixture in her stories, slipping into conversations with a familiarity that made Ethan's stomach twist. "Josh had this brilliant idea for the layout," she'd say, or "Josh told the funniest story at lunch." Josh, the coworker who seemed to know her better than Ethan did these days. He'd met him once at a firm happy hour, a tall guy with an easy smile and a handshake that lingered a second too long. Ethan hadn't liked him then, but he'd brushed it off. Jealousy wasn't his style. He was loyal, steady, the kind of man who fixed things when they broke. But what do you do when the thing breaking is your marriage, and you don't even know why? He stood, the mug heavy in his hand, and walked to the kitchen. The sink was empty, another sign of the distance between them. Megan used to leave dishes piled up, teasing him about his need for order. "You're my structure," she'd say, kissing his cheek as he scrubbed a pan. Now, the kitchen was spotless, not because they'd found a rhythm, but because they barely ate together anymore. He set the mug down and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the backyard. The oak tree they'd planted together swayed in the evening breeze, its leaves catching the last light. It was still growing, but the ground beneath it felt unstable. What's happening to us? The question wasn't new, but it hit harder tonight. He thought the last time they'd talked, really talked, not about bills or schedules, but about dreams, fears, the things that used to spill out of them in the quiet hours. It was months ago, maybe longer. Now, their conversations were transactions, brief, functional, like passing notes in a meeting. Last night, she'd come home late, her makeup fresh, her lips slightly smudged, as if she'd reapplied it in the car. "Team dinner," she'd said, avoiding his eyes. Josh was telling these ridiculous stories, as usual. That name again, like a splinter under his skin. Ethan's fingers tightened around the counter's edge. He wanted to ask her, point blank, "Are you cheating on me?" But the words stuck in his throat, heavy with the fear of what her answer might be. If she said no, and he was wrong, he'd feel like a fool, the paranoid husband he swore he'd never become. If she said yes, he wasn't ready for that truth. Not yet. His mind, ever the engineer, tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was stress. Maybe it was the ebb and flow of a long marriage. But his heart, quieter but louder in its own way, whispered something else. You're losing her. He turned away from the window and walked to the hallway, where a small mirror hung above a console table. His reflection stared back, 38, with lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, dark hair starting to gray at the temples. He didn't look broken, not yet, but he felt it, a crack running through the foundation of who he was. Megan had always called him her rock, but even rocks erode under enough pressure. He touched the mirror, his fingers leaving a faint smudge, and made a promise to himself. I won't let this break me. Not without knowing the truth. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the world moved on, indifferent to the storm brewing inside him. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that storm was closer than he thought, and when it hit, it would tear down everything he'd built. For now, he stood in the quiet, listening to the house breathe, and wondered if he'd ever feel at home again. The Thursday sky hung heavy with the threat of rain, its gray weight pressing down on Austin's streets. Ethan drove through the city, his hands steady on the wheel, but his mind anything but. The day had been a grind. Endless meetings, a client nitpicking his latest design for a turbine system. He was tired, the kind of tired that settles into your bones, but beneath it, a flicker of resolve burned. He wanted to do something kind, something to bridge the growing chasm between him and Megan. The new Italian place, Lasta, had been on her radar for weeks. My team keeps raving about it, she'd said, her voice bright in a way that felt rare lately. They hadn't gone yet, always too busy, too distracted. Tonight, he'd change that. He'd pick up dinner, surprise her, maybe spark a moment that reminded them both of who they used to be. The restaurant's parking lot was crowded, cars gleaming under the sodium glow of streetlights. Ethan parked near the back, the air cool and damp as he stepped out, carrying the faint scent of garlic and basil from the open kitchen door. Lasta was alive with pre-dinner energy, windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside, the soft clink of glasses and laughter spilling out. He pushed through the heavy oak door, and the atmosphere enveloped him. Low lighting from wrought iron chandeliers, red linen tablecloths, the hum of conversation weaving through the clatter of cutlery. A hostess with a practiced smile greeted him. Table for one. Or are you meeting someone? Just picking up a to-go order, Ethan said, his voice quieter than he intended. Haven't placed it yet. She nodded, gesturing toward the bar. You can wait there. It's a busy night. He moved toward the polished mahogany counter, his eyes scanning the room absently. Couples leaned close over candlelit tables. A group of coworkers laughed too loudly in a booth. A waiter balanced a tray of steaming plates. And then, like a needle scratching across a record, his gaze stopped. In a corner booth by the window, half hidden by a potted olive tree, was Megan. Her silhouette was unmistakable, shoulders slightly slouched, one leg tucked beneath her, her fingers twirling a straw in a glass of white wine. Her hair caught the light, a cascade of chestnut waves, and she was laughing, her head tilted back in a way that used to be reserved for him. Across from her sat Josh. Ethan's stomach lurched. He'd seen him before, tall, polished, with that effortless charm that made Ethan feel like a blueprint next to a finished building. Josh leaned forward, his tie loosened, his smile wide as he said something that made Megan laugh again. Not the polite chuckle she gave clients, but the full, unguarded kind that shook her shoulders. Ethan stood frozen, half shielded by a column, his breath shallow. He shouldn't be watching like this, like a stranger spying on his own life, but he couldn't look away. Megan reached out, her fingers brushing something off Josh's shirt, then lingering to adjust his tie with a slow, deliberate ease. The gesture was intimate, practiced, as if her hands knew the shape of him. The world tilted. Ethan's heart pounded, a dull roar in his ears drowning out the restaurant's buzz. This isn't happening. But it was. His legs moved before his mind caught up, each step heavier, the floor seeming to sway beneath him. The column no longer hit him. 5 feet from their table, Megan looked up. Her laugh faltered, her eyes widening for a split second before her lips curved into a strained smile. Ethan. Her voice was too high, a note of panic beneath the surprise. Josh turned, his expression confused but not guilty, which somehow made it worse. Ethan didn't look at him. His hand slid into his pocket, fingers closing around the cool metal of his wedding ring. He'd been twisting it absent-mindedly all day, a habit born of years. Now it felt like a shackle. He pulled it off, the motion slow and deliberate, and placed it on the table. It landed with a soft clink, a tiny sound that cut through the noise like a gunshot. The ring sat there, glinting between their wine glasses, a silent accusation. "I guess you need this more than I do," Ethan said, his voice low, steady, though inside he was unraveling. Megan's chair scraped as she stood, her napkin falling to the floor. "Ethan, wait, what are you doing?" Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she followed him toward the door. Heads turned, conversations paused, the restaurant's warmth suddenly stifling. He kept walking, the exit a beacon in the haze. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she called, grabbing his arm just outside the bar. Her touch burned, and he pulled away, turning to face her. "Am I?" His voice was sharper now, though he kept it low. "You adjusted his time, Megan. You laugh with him like you haven't laughed with me in months. And I'm supposed to believe this is just dinner." She scoffed, crossing her arms, but her eyes darted to the side, avoiding his. "You're jealous again." "It was nothing. We were talking about a project. Josh told a joke, that's all." Again, the word hung between them, heavy with history. Ethan took a breath, his chest tight. "You looked at him like he's the only person in the room. You touched him like it's second nature. Don't tell me I'm imagining this. It's not what you think." Her voice rose, drawing glances from a passing waiter. "It's never what you think, is it, Ethan?" Josh appeared behind her, jacket in hand, his discomfort palpable. "I should go," he muttered, glancing between them. "This feels personal." "No," Megan snapped, spinning toward him. "Go back inside. I'll handle this." She turned back to Ethan, her expression softening, but it was a performance, not remorse. "I told you it's just dinner. You're making something out of nothing." Ethan stared at her, the woman he'd loved for nearly a decade, and felt the ground shift beneath him. Her words were a mirror, reflecting every moment he'd doubted himself, every time he'd silenced his instincts to keep the peace. "I'm not making this up," he said, his voice cracking despite his effort. "I saw you, Megan. I saw you." She opened her mouth, but no words came. For a moment, they stood there, the night air cool against Ethan's skin, the distant hum of traffic a reminder that the world hadn't stopped, even if it had. He turned and walked to his car, his steps mechanical. Behind him, Megan's voice faded. "Ethan, please." He didn't look back. Inside the car, he sat with the engine running, the dashboard lights casting shadows across his hands. He stared at the street. People passing with takeout bags, a couple holding hands, the normalcy of their lives a cruel contrast to the chaos in his. His mind replayed her laugh, her hand on Josh's tie, the ease of their closeness. It wasn't just tonight. It was the months of distance, the late nights, the locked phone, the new perfume. The truth was a blade, and it was cutting deeper with every heartbeat. How did I miss this? The question echoed, unanswered. He drove, no destination, just a hum of tires on asphalt and the weight of life he thought he knew slipping away. The city blurred past, neon signs, quiet neighborhoods, the diner where they used to share fries after late movies. Every landmark was a ghost, haunting him with what was and what might never be again. He pulled into a grocery store lot, the engine idling, and sat in the dark, his hands gripping the wheel. The ring was gone, but its absence burned, a phantom limb he wasn't ready to mourn. The days after the restaurant blurred into a haze of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. Ethan lay in the guest room, the ceiling a blank canvas for his spiraling thoughts. The house, once a haven, now felt like a crime scene, every corner holding clues he hadn't wanted to see. Megan's perfume bottle on the bathroom counter, the gym bag by the door, the way her phone stayed glued to her hand. These were no longer quirks, but evidence, each one a pinprick to his already bruised heart. He'd left his wedding ring on that restaurant table, but the weight of it lingered, a ghost circling his finger. Sleep was a stranger. At 3 a.m., He'd stare at the shadows, replaying Megan's laugh, her hand on Josh's tie, her dismissive, "You're jealous again." The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they made him doubt himself. Asterisk, was I wrong? Did I overreact? Asterisk, his mind, trained to solve problems with logic, wrestled with the chaos of his emotions. He wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, a moment blown out of proportion. But his gut, quieter but surer, whispered the truth. She's not yours anymore. The house was too still, the silence broken only by the hum of the refrigerator or the occasional creak of settling wood. Megan acted as if nothing had happened, coming home at her usual time, cooking pasta with that creamy mushroom sauce he used to love. "How was your day?" she'd ask, her voice light, practiced, as if they were still the couple in the Colorado photo, laughing under a snowy sky. Ethan played along, nodding, forcing a smile, but inside, a storm was building. He didn't mention the restaurant, didn't ask about Josh. Not yet. He knew her too well. She'd twist it, make him the paranoid one, the husband who saw betrayal in every glance. He'd seen her do it before, deflecting with a smile, turning questions into accusations. So he waited, gathering the strength to face what he couldn't unsee. That strength came from a call he almost didn't make. Marcus, a college buddy turned cybersecurity consultant, had always been the guy Ethan turned to when life got heavy. They'd bonded over late-night study sessions and bad dorm coffee. And though years had stretched their friendship thin, Marcus was still the one who'd listen without judgment. Ethan dialed his number, his hands cold against the phone. "Hey, man," he said, his voice rough. "I need a favor." "It's weird." Marcus didn't hesitate. "Tell me." Ethan spilled it all, not the details, but enough. The restaurant, Josh, Megan's lies. The line was quiet for a moment. Then Marcus sighed. "Damn, Ethan. I am sorry. You sure you want to dig into this? Once you know, you can't unknow it." "I'm already in the dark," Ethan said. "I need the truth. All of it." Marcus promised to help. And within days, he delivered. Visitor logs from Megan's firm, security footage from the building's common areas, even vacation day records she'd never mentioned. The evidence was damning. Days she'd claimed were for conferences were logged as personal leave, and clips showed her and Josh leaving together, laughing, their hands brushing as they walked. But the real blow came when Ethan opened Megan's laptop, left on the kitchen counter in a rush to work. He hadn't meant to snoop. His printer was out of ink, and he needed to print an invoice. But a notification flashed. "Asterisk, see you at the hotel, same room. Can't wait." Asterisk, the sender's name was Josh. Ethan's breath caught, his fingers hovering over the trackpad. It could be spam, a mistake, a group chat taken out of context. But he clicked, and the world fell apart. The chat was from an app he didn't recognize, a thread stretching back months. Messages like, "Asterisk, you looked incredible last night. Wish you were here now." Asterisk, photos of them in hotel rooms, selfies with matching smiles, her head on his shoulder. Asterisk, "I'll tell Ethan it's a late meeting. We'll have the whole night." Asterisk, each word was a punch, each image a knife. He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. His worst fears laid bare in pixels and timestamps. He closed the laptop, his hands shaking, and sat at the kitchen table, the room spinning. The coffee maker hissed, a cruel reminder of normalcy. Asterisk, how long? How could she? Asterisk, the questions piled up, but beneath them was a deeper wound. Why wasn't I enough? He thought of the nights he'd waited up, the dinners he'd cooked, the times he'd asked how her day was, hoping to reconnect. All while she was building a secret life, one where he was the outsider. He couldn't confront her yet, not with her denials still ringing in his ears, her ability to make him feel crazy. He needed more than his pain. He needed facts. That's when he found Amanda, Josh's wife. It took some digging, scrolling through Megan's social media, cross-referencing tag photos until he found a name, Amanda R. Her Instagram led to a design page with an email. Ethan hesitated, his cursor blinking over the compose button. How do you start a message like that? "Hi, I think our spouses are cheating on us." He kept it simple. Asterisk, I'm Ethan, Megan's husband. I believe Josh is having an affair with my wife. I have proof. You deserve to know. Asterisk. He expected silence, maybe a block. But the next morning, an email arrived. Asterisk, Ethan, I've had suspicions too. Please tell me everything. Asterisk, Amanda's words were calm, measured, but Ethan felt her pain through the screen. He sent her screenshots. Nothing explicit, just enough to confirm the relationship. She replied within hours, her tone steady but raw. Asterisk, I'm heartbroken, but not surprised. Asterisk, then she shared her own evidence. Messages Josh had sent to a friend, bragging about sneaking around, calling Megan the best thing to happen to my marriage in years. Ethan's hands shook as he read it. It wasn't just betrayal. It was mockery, a game they thought they'd won. Amanda became his lifeline. Their emails were brief at first, cautious, but soon they were texting, sharing fragments of their pain. I keep wondering what I missed, she wrote one night. Ethan replied, me too, but we're not the ones who broke this. Her strength, quiet but unyielding, anchored him. They weren't victims. They were witnesses, piecing together a truth neither wanted but both needed. One evening, over a call, Amanda's voice was firm. We deserve better than their lies, Ethan. Let's make sure they can't hide. Her words lit a spark. Ethan wasn't just a betrayed husband anymore. He was a man reclaiming his reality, one fact at a time. The evidence was his armor, Amanda his ally. He didn't know what came next, but for the first time since that night at Lasta, he felt the ground steady beneath him. The truth was heavy, but it was his, and he wouldn't let it go. The downtown hotel ballroom glittered like a false promise, its chandeliers casting prisms of light across polished floors and white-draped tables. The annual holiday party for Megan's architecture firm was a spectacle. String lights woven through evergreen garlands, the clink of champagne flutes, laughter rising like bubbles in a glass. Ethan stood at the entrance, his charcoal suit crisp but his heart pounding, each beat a reminder of why he was here. Beside him, Amanda adjusted her black cocktail dress, her expression calm, but her eyes sharp with purpose. They weren't here for revenge. They were here for truth, and the weight of it sat heavy in the USB drive in Ethan's pocket. The past week had been a meticulous preparation, not born of spite but necessity. Ethan and Amanda had gathered everything. Screenshots of messages, dated and labeled, security footage clips of Megan and Josh leaving work hand in hand, hotel confirmations with their names. Marcus had helped, his expertise ensuring the evidence was airtight. This is your call, he'd said, handing Ethan the files. But don't let them make you feel crazy. Amanda had done her part, collecting Josh's text to his friend, each one a boast about his adventure with Megan. They'd rented a projector, a deliberate choice. Words could be denied, twisted. Images couldn't. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with the firm's elite, partners in tailored suits, designers in shimmering gowns, clients mingling with practiced smiles. A jazz quartet played softly, their notes weaving through the chatter. Ethan scanned the room, his stomach tightening. Josh was at the bar, a whiskey in hand, laughing with a junior architect as if he owned the night. Megan hadn't arrived yet. The air smelled of cedar and citrus, but to Ethan, it was suffocating, a veneer of festivity masking the rot beneath. Amanda touched his arm, her voice low. You ready? He nodded, though his throat was dry. Let's do this. They approached the event coordinator, a harried woman clutching a clipboard. We'd like to add a short montage to the year-end presentation, Ethan said, his tone steady. A surprise for the team. She barely looked up, waving them toward the AV table. The projector hummed to life, its blue glow a quiet promise of what was to come. Ethan's fingers brushed the USB drive, his resolve hardening. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about reclaiming his reality, about showing the world what he'd been forced to see. 10 minutes later, Megan walked in, her red dress catching the light like a flame. She was radiant, her hair curled, her arm linked with Josh's as they laughed at some shared joke. Ethan's chest ached, not with longing but with the clarity of betrayal. She hadn't just cheated, she'd built a parallel life, one where he was a footnote. Amanda's hand tightened on her clutch, but her face remained composed. Now, she whispered. Now, Ethan said. He stepped to the podium, the microphone amplifying the rustle of his suit. The MC, mid-sentence about the firm's achievements, froze. The room turned, a sea of curious faces, a few clapping awkwardly, assuming he was part of the program. Megan's eyes found him, her smile faltering, a flicker of panic crossing her face. Ethan took a breath, his voice steady despite the storm inside. Good evening, he said. I'm Ethan, Megan's husband. Before your year-end montage, I'd like to share a different kind of project, one Megan and Josh have been working on in secret. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone coughed. Ethan clicked the remote, and the screen behind him lit up. The first image was a selfie. Megan and Josh in a hotel room, her head on his chest, their smiles intimate. Gasps punctuated the silence. The next slide, a message from Josh. Asterisk can't stop thinking about you. Same room tomorrow. Asterisk then security footage, time-stamped, showing them leaving work early, hands entwined. The ballroom went quiet, the jazz quartet's notes fading into the void. Megan stood frozen, her hand over her mouth, her red dress a stark contrast to her paling face. Josh's glass slipped, shattering on the floor, the sound like a gunshot. Ethan kept his gaze forward, his voice even. This explains why Megan's been too busy for dinner lately, and why Josh became her favorite coworker. No one laughed. The air was thick with shock, whispers spreading like wildfire. Megan stepped forward, her voice trembling. Ethan, please. This isn't fair. Fair. He turned to her, his eyes burning, but his tone calm. Fair would have been honesty, Megan. Fair would have been not lying to me every day for months. Josh tried to speak, his voice shaky. This is private, man. You didn't need to. Amanda cut him off, stepping forward, her presence commanding. Private. Her voice was ice, each word deliberate. You didn't care about privacy when you texted your buddy about how exciting Megan was, did you? Or when you sent me that message by mistake last month? The crowd gasped again, heads swiveling. Amanda crossed her arms, her gaze locked on Josh. You thought you were untouchable. You both did. The screen cycled through more evidence. Hotel receipts, messages about their usual room. Megan's boss, a stern man in a pinstripe suit, gripped the edge of a table, his face a mask of fury. Guests shifted uncomfortably, some slipping toward the exits, others staring openly at Megan and Josh, who stood like statues in a crumbling gallery. Ethan stepped back to the mic, his final words simple. The truth doesn't hide forever. Thank you. He and Amanda turned, their steps synchronized as they left the ballroom. The whispers followed, a low roar of judgment. In the lobby, Megan's voice broke through. Ethan, wait. Her heels clicked frantically, her face streaked with mascara. Please, let me explain. He stopped but didn't turn. You had months to explain, Megan. You chose lies. His voice was quiet, final. Amanda stood beside him, her silence a shield. They walked to the parking garage, the cool night air a balm against the heat of the moment. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but his shoulders were straight. Amanda's voice was soft. You okay? I will be, he said, meeting her eyes. She nodded, her own hand steady now. Me too. They drove in silence, the city's lights blurring past, a canvas of possibility rather than pain. The fallout would come. Gossip, consequences, the unraveling of Megan and Josh's carefully crafted facades. But tonight, the lies were exposed, and Ethan felt something he hadn't in months. Control. Not over Megan, not over the past, but over himself. The truth was his, and it was enough. The house was quiet, but for the first time in months, the silence didn't suffocate. Ethan sat on the couch, a packed suitcase at his feet, its zipper glinting in the lamplight. He'd folded Megan's clothes with the same care he once used to fix a leaking faucet or align a blueprint. Methodical, precise, a ritual of closure. Her sweaters, her sundresses, the t-shirt she wore on lazy Sundays. All were artifacts of a life that no longer fit. The air smelled faintly of cedar and the coffee he'd brewed an hour ago, a small act of normalcy amid the wreckage. Outside, the Austin night hummed with crickets, the city's pulse a reminder that life moved on, even when your world stopped. The holiday party had been hours ago, but its echoes lingered. The gasps, the shattered glass, Megan's trembling plea, they played in Ethan's mind like a film he couldn't pause. He didn't regret it. The truth, laid bare on that ballroom screen, had freed him, not from pain but from doubt. He wasn't the paranoid husband, the fool who saw shadows where there were none. He was Ethan, and he'd faced the betrayal head-on, with evidence as his voice and Amanda as his witness. Now, the question wasn't what he'd lost, but what he'd build next. Megan came home just after midnight, her keys scraping in the lock. She stepped inside, barefoot, heels dangling from one hand, her red dress creased, her mascara smudged into dark crescents. She looked small, fragile, A far cry from the woman who'd laughed with Josh in Lasta's warm glow. "Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" He stood, the suitcase a silent sentinel beside him. "There's nothing left to say." His tone was even, not cold but final, the culmination of months of swallowed questions and silenced instincts. Her eyes widened, darting to the bag. "What's that?" "Your things," he said, gesturing to it. "You can't stay here anymore." She broke then, a quiet sob shaking her shoulders. "Please, Ethan. I messed up. I know I did. But we can fix this. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit the firm. I'll cut Josh off. Anything." Her words tumbled out, desperate, each one a plea for a second chance she'd already squandered. Ethan looked at her, the woman he'd loved for nearly a decade, and felt a pang. Not love, not anymore, but grief for what they'd been. "You had 100 chances, Megan," he said softly. "Every late night, every lie, every time you looked me in the eye and made me doubt myself. You chose him, over and over. I didn't mean to hurt you," she said, tears streaming now, her hands twisting the hem of her dress. "I was lonely. I didn't feel seen." He shook his head, the words landing like ash. "You didn't feel seen? I was here, Megan, cooking dinners you didn't eat, asking about your day, waiting for you to come back to me. You weren't invisible. You just looked somewhere else." She reached for him, but he stepped back, the space between them a chasm no apology could bridge. "I'm sorry," she whispered, over and over, as if repetition could mend what she'd broken. "Sorry doesn't rebuild trust," he said. "No more words. It's done." She lingered in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the porch light, waiting for him to soften, to cave as he once might have. But Ethan stood firm, his resolve a wall she couldn't breach. Finally, she took the suitcase, her steps heavy, and left. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was different, clean, like the air after a storm. Ethan locked the door, the sound a full stop to their story. The next morning, he called a locksmith, the new keys a small but tangible reclaiming. He stripped the bed, donated the wedding photos and anniversary gifts, each act a shedding of skin. The house felt lighter, less like a museum of loss. He signed up for a cooking class, something Megan had always promised to join, but never did. He texted old friends, guys he'd drifted from while trying to hold his marriage together. Over beers with Marcus, he laughed for the first time in months, the sound surprising him. "You're tougher than you look," Marcus said, clapping his shoulder. Ethan smiled, not quite believing it, but wanting to. Amanda stayed in touch, their connection a quiet lifeline. Not romantic, but real. Two people who'd walked through the same fire and come out singed but standing. They texted about recipes, shared podcasts, traded stories of small victories. "Made a decent risotto last night," she wrote one evening. Ethan grinned, typing back, "Send proof," or it didn't happen. Her reply, a photo of a creamy dish, came with a note. "Your turn." These moments, small and ordinary, were stitches in a wound that was slowly closing. The pain didn't vanish. It lingered, a dull ache that flared when he passed the diner where they used to share late-night fries or saw a couple holding hands. But it was background noise now, not the deafening roar it had been. Ethan was learning to live with it, to let it coexist with the man he was becoming. He wasn't the husband who'd doubted himself, who'd let lies erode his sense of worth. He was Ethan, rebuilding not out of anger, but out of respect, for the truth, for the life he deserved. One evening, he stood on his balcony, the Austin skyline a tapestry of lights against the spring sky. The breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, a whisper of renewal. He leaned against the railing, his hands steady, his breathing even. The city stretched before him, vast and unknowable, but for the first time, the unknown didn't scare him. He'd faced the worst, betrayal, doubt, the unraveling of a decade, and he'd survived. More than that, he'd chosen himself. The stars were faint, outshone by the city's glow, but Ethan saw them, pinpricks of light in the dark. They were enough. He was enough. And as the night unfolded, he stepped back inside, leaving the door open to whatever came next.